Have you ever felt a wave of anger, panic, or irritation hit you so hard that you couldn't stop it, even if you wanted to? And maybe you then snapped at someone or you shut down completely. Maybe you felt ashamed right after but couldn't stop it in the moment. That's emotional dysregulation. And for many of us with complex trauma, it's not about overreacting. It's about a nervous system that never learned safety. In this episode today, we will look at why CPTSD makes emotional regulation so difficult, how to recognize and manage the triggers behind these intense reactions, and what it actually takes to feel safe again inside your body and your relationships. Let's get into it. Welcome to today's episode. My name is Robert, and this video is based on my own experience, research, and therapy work. I'm not a healthcare professional myself. Instead, I share a client's perspective here on this channel, and for everyone who's looking for more in-depth resources for working through the symptoms of complex trauma, I share the most significant learnings and practical exercises from years of therapy in our online courses and premium community, and you can get access today at understandable.net/join. And a quick overview for this video. This video is the fourth one of an 8-part series on the major symptoms of childhood trauma. And in this series, we're discussing the 8 core symptoms described in my favorite CPTSD paper, Adult Survivors of Childhood Trauma, which are hypervigilance, flashbacks, elder attention, emotional dysregulation, which we're talking about today, interpersonal instability, toxic shame, somatic symptoms, and avoidance. And you will find all the links to the episodes of this series in the description below every episode and on our channel playlist about complex childhood trauma. To get a better understanding of how emotional dysregulation feels like and if you are affected by it, maybe without even knowing about it, let's explore the connection between dysregulation and childhood trauma a bit more. So, how does it feel like? Well, when you are dysregulated emotionally, then your emotions feel so intense that they completely fill you up, your whole body. They take you over entirely. And often what I say to good friends or to myself when I'm in such a state, I'm saying you are in the emotion. You are completely flooded by the emotion. And often those emotions are intense anger, intense states of grief, even depressive states, or shame. And what's typical for dysregulation is that you can't really control these states. So when you are in such a state, you can't figure out anything. Navigating dysregulated is like kind of driving drunk. So it's difficult. And where did it come from? Well, it's definitely rooted in early childhood trauma, and in my favorite childhood trauma paper, emotional dysregulation is described like this. They write, emotional dysregulation is always linked to irritability, to chronic hyperarousal, to also a recurrent or a chronic suicidal ideation in the worst case, also linked to self-harm and to maladaptive coping strategies. And they define it as problems in affect regulation. So this is where it usually comes out, where you explode, where you are in rage, in anger, when you have like a conflict, when you are triggered, often in a social interaction in your daily life. Now, where exactly is it rooted in childhood trauma? Well, what could happen through childhood when you are living in a toxic environment, in a toxic home, when you grew up there have been a lot of unmet needs in your childhood. There were also probably emotionally unavailable caregivers. So you haven't been seen, you haven't been heard. There was an invalidation of your feelings. Often children from difficult homes have been told that they are wrong, that they are unimportant in a way. There was a lot of chronic stress or trauma. So an overactivating fear response during childhood. Shame-based conditioning was often present. So the shame was internalized by the children. That then leads to emotional overwhelm and also a lack of co-regulation. That means, especially for people with an avoidant attachment style or who developed an avoidant attachment style, that they learn that they are solely dependent on themselves. They became self-soothers, auto-regulators. So co-regulation was never an option for them because it was never safe to show themselves vulnerable. And also very important to understand when it comes to emotional dysregulation and childhood trauma is that it was never your fault that you feel this way. It is rooted within your childhood relationships, usually with your caregivers. So dysregulation comes from the past, but it is triggered in the present, in the here and now. And how does that work? And how can we identify and manage those personal triggers that trigger dysregulation in the here and now? Because the truth is that most of us don't always know it is happening in the moment when we are in such states. Then we suddenly feel off. Our hearts suddenly racing. We are flooded with emotion and we might feel rejected suddenly, unsafe, furious, or like we need to get away from something, to fix something, or to shut everything down. The primary emotions in those triggering states, as I said, are usually things such as anger, rage when you are in conflict with someone, when you're also feeling that you're easily irritable, when there is grief, a depressive state, when there is shame. So the most intense emotions on the emotional wheel. Let's check this out. I have the emotional wheel here. The most intense emotions are often those negative ones. Those are the emotion that's completely filling us up. It also could be, for example, positive excitement, of course, but usually we don't perceive excitement or joy as so difficult or so penetrating. So those are the triggering main feelings. It doesn't always come from big events, so those triggering situations. It can also be something subtle, and maybe you know that. So I've created a list here of common triggers in dysregulation that I want to go through now with you. For example, and that's something that's relatable, a shift in someone's tone's voice. When someone suddenly just changes how they speak, how they express themselves, and it kind of reminds you maybe to your dad, to your mom, and it's triggering. A facial expression that reminds you of disapproval. Someone suddenly canceling plans. A text left unanswered. Those things, they can trigger you and make you feel that you're not seen or not heard. Another one is being interrupted while you're speaking. So someone is just saying something while you're trying to finish a sentence. Feeling dismissed or not taken seriously. Getting feedback, even if it's kind, that's criticism. That's the sensation of being judged. A look that feels like rejection. And you might think, why do you look at me like this? You don't like me, you judge me. But for them, it's maybe not that way, but you're interpreting it that way. Someone walking away when you're upset, or even just feeling like you're being left out. Again, those situations are usually the situations where you're reminded of situations from the past, experiences where you haven't felt seen, you haven't felt heard, and that's triggering you, brings up those emotions back in. And maybe those sound pretty relatable to you right now. Maybe they already make you shaky or moving just by me reading them to you. And when you have a history of trauma, it's usually your central nervous system being triggered. And your central nervous system gets into a fight, flight, or freeze response. And I want to have a look at that with you now. Trauma is always stored somewhere within your body, as Peter Levine, for example, describes in his work. Now, why is our body reacting like this? In your past, your central nervous system has been triggered to react like this, to react in a specific way in order to protect you. And it was your only chance to get your needs met. Very important to understand. As children, we have our basic needs and we have to get them met. If we don't get them met, we fear that we could die or we actually die. This is how nature works. So we have to find a way in order to get our needs met. Even if that means, okay, we have toxic caregivers who are emotionally unavailable, but we somehow need safety, need shelter, need a connection with them. And if that means to constantly hold ourselves back, do not communicate our feelings, then we have to do that in order to reach a certain level of safety, even if that's kind of a repression of our feelings or needs then. And we can explain this reaction that's happening in the central nervous system, the fight, flight, or freeze state. For example, using theories like Polyvagal is just a model, it's a concept of how the central nervous system could work. It has been criticized in the past, and I made a full episode about it up here, Polyvagal theory. But the central nervous system could look like this in a model. So usually we have the ventral vagal state, the calm state, the relaxed state, as it is described here in this theory, where we feel present, where we'll feel grounded, connected with ourselves. And in an activated state where we are potentially facing a threat or a difficult situation with a caregiver back then, we enter the fight mode maybe, where we have been in a sympathetic state, an anger state, a rage state. And you see where it's going here already. Those are typically the states which are linked to emotional dysregulation. So this is described, emotional dysregulation, as a shift in the central nervous system or the state of the central nervous system, entering, for example, anger mode, rage mode, frustration mode, but also the flight state, panic mode, fear mode, anxiety mode, or the freeze state, shutdown mode, dissociation mode, meaning a disconnection from ourselves, depression mode, shame mode, hopeless mode. And maybe you see that those are the same emotions connected with different states of our body, of our nervous system. So polyvagal theory teaches us that the central nervous system is constantly scanning for cues of safety or of danger. And this ability, this sensing, is called neuroception. And when your system picks up something, it perceives it as dangerous through neuroception. Whether it is real or not, it moves you into the fight, flight, freeze state, or even the fawn state, which is another one. The fawn state is kind of a pleasing state. It's where you just do maybe what others want from you to create harmony. And that shift usually happens fast. It's autonomic. But over time, you can learn to recognize these signs of dysregulation early. For example, when your breathing already gets shallow, when your jaw tenses, when your thoughts spiral, when you feel the urge to fix, flee, or lash out. So in the first step to managing triggers, you have to notice especially those shifts on the level of the central nervous system, and that's pretty early. So instead of asking, why am I like this? You might start asking, what just happened in my environment or in my body that made me feel unsafe? And that moment of awareness is very powerful, because when you can name a trigger, it becomes something you can respond to rather than something that hijacks you. And there are also a bunch of re-regulation resources that you can use to calm your nervous system down. And during my years of therapy, I collected a bunch of those resources that I want to share with you. And you can download the full list, so pages of resources that you need to re-regulate your nervous system and connect with your sense of self again. If you want to download the full list, just go to understandable.net/book and download the full free workbook with the list. One of the hardest parts of emotional dysregulation, especially when it comes to complex trauma, is how much it can affect our relationships. Even if we want to connect, even if we want to love, or if we do love the other person in front of us, and even if we know that they're not an enemy. Because here's the truth. When your nervous system doesn't feel safe, it's nearly impossible to feel truly connected. And then afterwards, you might feel shame or guilt thinking, why did I react like this? Or why do I always ruin things? But those reactions aren't truly who you are. They're protection responses your body learned to keep you safe, especially in relationships that didn't feel safe when growing up. This is where insecure attachment styles often come in. Because when your early experiences taught you that love might mean criticism, might mean withdrawal or unpredictability, your nervous system adapted to that. And maybe you learned to anxiously cling as a coping strategy, to constantly seek reassurance because connection felt fragile. Like I explained, for example, in this episode about 10 signs of an anxious attachment style. Or maybe you became avoidant because the only way you felt safe was to be by yourself. So pulling away when things got too close because closeness started to feel dangerous. I also did a full episode about 10 signs of an avoidant attachment style recently, which I will link to you up here and in the description below. Now, emotional dysregulation is also closely tied to relationship difficulties and toxic dynamics because dysregulation is increased through stress. And for people with a difficult childhood, relationships in general mean a lot of stress. Therefore, in the paper, the authors also summarized that survivors may find it more difficult to regulate their emotions when they are under stress or when they are re-experiencing a sense of powerlessness. Though that's closely connected, stress and dysregulation. It's kind of a devil's cycle there then of trauma, difficult relationships, stress and emotional dysregulation. And now the big question. What can you actually do when you feel overwhelmed, triggered, or emotional out of control? When your body is flooded with emotions, your mind is racing, and it feels like everything is too much. What can you do directly in those specific situations of dysregulation? The most important thing to understand here is that you're not trying to think your way out of it. You won't use cognitive work to end a dysregulated state. Pure behavior therapy will never work here. You have to work with your nervous system, and that means starting with safety. Because when you feel safe again, even in small, subtle ways, your whole system can start to settle again. And by the way, I have a full video here on this channel for the best 12 re-regulation tools and resources, which I will link to you up here and description below, of course. But here are a few potential tools that can help you to get back into regulation. And some of them are also in our re-regulation resources workbook and also in the video I just mentioned. The first one that I love a lot and I just did recently is changing the environment. When you change the overwhelming, triggering environment as quick as possible, then you simply remove triggers. And sometimes it's good to just flee or to just run away to stop you from developing even more dysregulation if you're already triggered. That's always a good thing if that's possible to just go away. Maybe when you're in a social situation, you can also always just go for the bathroom or just go in front of the door, get some fresh air, always a good thing. Second thing is slowing your breath. A long, deep exhale always tells your body that it's safe to relax. And sometimes it's difficult, I know that, especially when you have, for example, sleep problems or you are in a social situation with other people, but still try to breathe. Continue and try to get into a continuous flow of breathing that calms you down instantly. Grounding yourself into the present is another one. So feel your feet, touch something with texture, look directly through your own eyes. That's a big one also from hypnotherapy. When you look directly through your own eyes, for example, also when you focus on the blind spot, there is a blind spot when you close the eyes. You see this tiny black dot in the middle of the field of vision. And when you focus on that and open your eyes again, then you have a pretty clear, distinct view directly through your eyes. And that often means switching from the third person perspective. So often we see ourselves from the side, from above, within a dysregulated state, back into the first person view. this is what you want to do here. You can also move your body gently, so shake your hands, stretch, or just sway. Movement always helps to release stuck energy. Also walking, running if that's necessary. If you have a flat response, a good thing. And also speak to you with care. A soft reminder like, I'm safe right now, or this feeling will pass, can make a real difference, because what we all know for sure, there is certainty that feelings always pass and that life always goes on. Now you can choose whatever suits you best, and also what helps you with your individual needs. Another important reminder here is to practice these tools and skills before you're in a crisis. Because the more familiar your system becomes with regulation, the easier it becomes to return to safety when you're actually triggered. So healing from emotional dysregulation doesn't mean you will never get overwhelmed again, but it does mean that you will start to feel more in control and more steady, more connected to yourself and to other people. And you know what you do when you're emotionally dysregulated then. Because safety isn't a place you will arrive at. Safety is something that you can build inside yourself, moment by moment, and that's what this work is really about. And I also recently released a new course about safety where I explain the concept between bottom-up and top-down safety, and that bottom-up safety actually is this true feeling that you can install within yourself, where you always can get back to. And I released the course in our premium platform, and if you want to also join our community and get access to those premium courses that help you to work through complex trauma, then you can just go to understandable.net/join. Join our platform today, and I see you there. What do you think about emotional dysregulation? What skills do you use, and what resources did you build in the past years? Feel free to share those in the comments below. And if you want to support the podcast, leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Subscribe here on the YouTube channel. And I see and speak to you in the next episode here on the channel. Have a great day.